Hello, welcome along, Explorer. My name's Dan. You and me, we're travelling around the universe, and it's all about your questions in a brand new science quest. If you have anything sciencey that you want answered on this show, well, you need to send it over to me. Really easy to do it. Best way as a voice note on the free Fun Kids app and at funkidslive.com. And that way I can do all the digging for you. I can look everything up. I can research the whole universe. And we'll see what we can do. We'll sort things out. First question this week from Griffin.
Hi Dan, this is Griffin. Love your show. I've got a question for you. Why do some materials burn and not others? Thanks.
Why do some materials not burn? Well, fire needs three things to burn, really. You need fuel, oxygen, and heat. Well, most things have a fuel because they are fuel, aren't they? Things can be eaten, they can be consumed by a flame. So that's the fuel sorted. It's the other two things that get in the way of some materials failing to ignite. You see, some objects, some materials like glass or sand or gold, their atoms are too stable. So the oxygen can't break down, it can't get away, it can't break free so it can burn. Not like wood, which is made of molecules where the oxygen really easily breaks down when it's heated. So it falls down there, that's why some materials don't burn. Also, a material needs to get hot enough. Some things like steel, well, that needs to reach 1,500 degrees Celsius to break down and be burned. It's so hard for it to get that hot. When you think of like wood needs to get to a few hundred degrees Celsius. So it's much higher, and it's really hard for the flame to sustain and keep at that heat. Another problem with steel and metals is that they conduct heat too well. They spread the energy from one particle to another too easily. And that disperses it so it won't get hot enough. It kind of moves the energy away. And, well, loads of materials have water in them. And water suffocates fire, it starves it of oxygen, so they won't burn until they cool down. So, Griffin, that's why some materials don't burn. Normally, because they don't get hot enough, they can't get the oxygen free, or they're a bit too wet. Thank you very much for the question, Griffin. Let's get on another one. Here's a question from Livy. Hey, Livy, you're 11 years old. You want to know what happens when we fall asleep. Thank you for sending this to me as a message on the Fun Kids website. What happens when we fall asleep? Well, sleep is a strange thing because it goes against what us humans should do. Think back to when we were cave people. I know you weren't alive then, but just picture yourself as a cave person. Well, sleeping for hours, leaving yourself open to an attack from big predators, from beasts, that would seem a really silly thing to do. You just spark out, snoozing, while some massive saber-toothed tiger is trying to feast on you. So it must be really important. Well, it is. We need to sleep to rest our brain, to get rid of the things that we've seen during the day that we don't need to remember, kind of waste space, also to grow our body. It's at that point, normally when you're sleeping, that the real growth works. That's why you might get growing pains in your bones when you're tired at night, because it's starting to get to work. Now, a sleep cycle, here's what happens when we fall asleep. A sleep cycle goes through about 2 hours. You're in a deep sleep, that's when the rest really happens, and you only dream at the very end in what's called REM sleep, R-E-M, it stands for rapid eye movement. In that part of your sleep, it's when you're doing a lot of the dreaming, and your eyes are moving all over the place under the lid, that's how it gets its name, and quite a lot of you is paralysed. Sounds really strange, but it's for a good reason, it's so you don't get off and go act out your dream. That's why if you're going to have a nap, try and plan it around like 90 minutes to 2 hours, so you've gone through a sleep cycle, so you won't wake up fully exhausted. Liv, thank you for the question. Here's one from Lucy. Hey Lucy, why do we get headaches? Well, there are quite a lot of different types of headaches. Here's something interesting I found out. The brain doesn't feel pain inside it, not properly. So headaches aren't really coming from your brain, they're coming from what's around it, like the muscles, the bones, the blood vessels in your head, or maybe your nose or your ears. The most common are tension headaches. That's the dull thud that you get that feels like it's there forever, that little ache that seems endless. Well, these are caused by the tiny muscles around your head getting too tense, tightening up. And when they do it for a while, it tells your brain that something's wrong, and it understands that, your brain does, as pain. Maybe you're really stressed at school, you're feeling a bit sad, you're a bit overwhelmed, maybe you haven't drunk enough water to help those muscles out. That'll cause a tension headache. The other types of headaches that are most common are called vascular headaches. That's when it happens in a very specific place, like a pin being jabbed into one part of your brain. It's normally because there's not enough blood maybe going to your head, or maybe the blood vessels around it are quite tight or swollen. That could happen because of something that you've eaten, or again, maybe that you're stressed. So it's what makes those pinprick feeling headaches, Lucy. Thank you for the question. Here's a really gross one from Charlie. Charlie, why do whales sometimes explode after they've died? Have you ever seen this? Sometimes it's on the news. It's strange and gross and gruesome when, like, huge whales that maybe get washed up on the beach and they can't get back in the ocean, so they sadly die. Well, sometimes they explode and their insides are thrown everywhere. It's because when a whale's organs are decomposing, when they're breaking down, it makes gas. It releases a lot of gas. The problem is the whale's skin and the blubber is quite thick and strong, so the gas has got nowhere to escape. So it builds up and up and up, and the pressure grows and grows and grows, and then it bursts, and then it escapes, Charlie. Thank you very much for that question. Oh, here's a voice note from Thomas. What do you have?
How do planes' landing gears work?
Well, the landing gear on an aeroplane, if you've ever flown on a plane, and right at the start and right at the end, just as you take off or land, you hear like a noise, don't you? Maybe like a winching, like a... Or maybe you hear a clank. Well, that's the landing gear moving up or moving down, normally. The landing gear is basically the plane's legs. It's got three main jobs: takeoff, support, taking most of the impact when you land, and moving around on the ground. Most planes have three different landing gears, or sets of landing gear. You've got the nose gear at the front, the small wheel, then you've got the main gear, two more wheels under the wings, usually. Each gear, well, it's not just a wheel. You've got brakes, you've got shock absorbers, you've got doors that allow the wheels and the brakes to move in and move out. You've got sensors. That's so the plane knows when the landing gear is ready and locked. What happens is when a plane lands, the wheel, along with the brake, along with the shock absorber, it kind of cushions the blow because you're still going really fast. When you're on the ground, the wheels help to steer the plane. The one at the front helps to brake it and slow it down. That's really what the landing gear is, Thomas. And there are so many backups. It's really tricky for the landing gear not to drop and for it to lock into place. So don't need to worry about that. That's what the landing gear does, Thomas. Thank you very much for your question. If you have anything sciencey that you'd love answered on this podcast next episode, because we do 2 a week, make sure you leave it as a voice note for me on the free Fun Kids app. You can do it at funkidslive.com too. There's a big red button. Click record. Let me know who you are. Let me know what your question. I will do the digging, or I'll find a specialist in that field to help sort it out for you. Now, we've had some lessons down here on Earth. Shall we get one from outer space? Shall we travel to the smartest school in the solar system, see what the team and the class are getting up to at Deep Space High?
Deep Space High, the Universe Handbook with the Science and Technology Facilities Council. Jump into a wormhole and travel to Deep Space High, the school in space. But hurry, because lessons are about to begin.
This term's assignment is to write your very own Universe Handbook. You'll want to cram it full of all the basic things you need to know about space exploration. Yeah, the nuts and bolts of it all. So, let's crack on. Talking of nuts and bolts, Electra, do you think this term you might just remember to tighten your screws to stop various robot limbs from impeding my progress across the room?
Sorry, sir.
Let's start at the beginning. What's the first thing you need to do when you're planning a journey into space?
Make sure you've inflated your lunar lilo?
I thought the holiday might have calmed you lot down. Fat chance. The first thing you need to do is work out where you're going. Have a good look at what's out there. So, how do we observe space?
We use a telescope.
Telescopes aren't the only way to observe space, you know, Alex.
Telescopes are, however, a great place to start. Much better than just using our eyes. Sorry, I'd forgotten you've only got the one blurb. Very nice it is too. So, telescopes, how do they work?
The standard optical telescope works by reflecting or refracting large quantities of light from the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum to a focal point observable through an eyepiece.
Or basically, it scoops up a load of light and squeezes it down to a small point on your eye, where the image appears a lot bigger than it started.
That's what I said!
You're both right, but optical telescopes only work for the visible universe, stuff our eyes, or eye, sorry blurb, can see.
Well, that's when you need a radio telescope, or an infrared telescope, or even an X-ray telescope.
Cool! Are they like X-ray specs? Can they see through walls?
Behave, Alex. Stats is right. Those sorts of telescopes can pick up waves our eyes can't see to give us even more information about the universe, including images. And infrared telescopes are particularly handy because they also give us information about the temperature of a planet. Have a look at this projection of an infrared image. You'd be right. This planet has been covered in ice for billions of years. What about this one?
Well, it's red and orange in swirls. Is it a hot planet?
You're right. The red-coloured images show us that the temperatures on this planet are much higher.
Much more my style. Get the sunglasses on, crack open the sun cream.
And then you'd burst into flames on this particular planet. Still a bit hotter than you used to, Alex. A toasty 3,000 degrees. So telescopes can tell us what's out there and how hot or cold they are. But if we're going to visit, we'll need to know how far we have to go. How do we measure distance in space?
Sat-nav?
It'd have to be a blooming big one. No, there are many ways to measure distance in space, but the most common method is called parallax.
Parallax? Isn't that the horrible galactic lurgy that everyone in school got last year?
No, Stats, although it does sound a bit like a nasty disease. Parallax is better shown than explained. If you hold your thumb in front of your face and look at it first with your right and then with your left eye, can you tell me what happens?
Weird. It looks like my thumb moves.
Bingo. It seems to move in relation to the background. How much it moves depends on how far away from your face it is. The distance to a star or planet can be measured by tracking its movement relative to other stars or planets further away. You have to take measurements from 2 places in our orbit to work it out. And the distance is given in light years.
If it's a distance, why is it measured in years? Shouldn't it be miles? And what's light got to do with it anyway?
The light year is used in astronomy because the universe is huge. The nearest star to your solar system, Alex, is Alpha Centauri, 24 trillion miles. And because the numbers are so big, scientists came up with a simpler unit. A light year is the distance that light travels in space in 1 year. It's around 6 trillion miles, give or take a bit. So Alpha Centauri is 4 light years away. Much simpler. That's the bell. Next time, we'll be having to think about how we prepare ourselves for deep space exploration.
Deep Space High, the Universe Handbook with the Science and Technology Facilities Council.
And that's it for this week's Science Quest. Thank you so much for being there. Thank you for your questions. If you have anything sciencey that you want answered on this podcast, make sure you leave it as a voice note on the free Fun Kids app or at funkidslive.com. And Fun Kids, we are a children's radio station. You can listen to us all around the country on the app, on the website, or if you've got a smart speaker, wake it up and ask it to play Fun Kids. And I'll see you soon.